Jay Menon and welcome to Stadium Unplugged. This is our series where we track down the most famous sportsmen and sportswomen across Asia and the world and ask them absolutely nothing about their sporting careers. What we're really interested in is who they are as people, what makes them tick and what's important to them, some of the key moments of their lives that brought them to where they are. We're talking about John Barnes, MBE. John, welcome to Stadium Unplugged. First of all, congratulations, you're daddy for the seventh time.
The seventh time, but I mean, you're misleading the viewers. You see, you track down sports stars all over the world. I was walking down the road in Petalinjaya. Don't know who you're after, but you just dragged me from Petalinjaya, so I haven't come too far.
That's right.
And I am a daddy for the seventh time.
All right.
I've had a little boy, Alexander, who's 2.5 months old, and my eldest is 25, so, and there's lots in between.
All right. How is it different having your first child and your seventh child?
Well, you don't worry so much when they fall over and hit their head, and you know, you pick them up, and you know, with your first child, every little noise. In fact, this is my second wife, and this is our third child together. But because it's her first boy, she's still a little bit nervous. So we have a baby listener in the room because she's 2 months, and every time the baby listener goes off and she's up. Whereas after my third child, that baby listener went out, you know, because you hear him scream. So every now and again, I turn the baby listener. You're much more relaxed. The more children you have, you're much more relaxed.
Now, you found out about your seventh child when you were on air. I mean, it was a funny story. What was the story there?
Well, it was the Liverpool versus Chelsea game. And in fact, Liverpool won, and, you know, they were going through a bit of a difficult period. I had agreed to do that Liverpool game against Chelsea live at Anfield. I'm half an hour from Anfield. And we were due to have the baby induced, as I've had most of my children induced, because I travel so much that I want to make sure that I'm there.
Yeah.
So rather than leaving it to chance and I could be away. So we're going to have the baby induced probably 10 days before the baby was even due to be born. But before we had her induced, the baby was born 10 days before we were going to have her induced. So I didn't expect her to be born at all. So when I went to Anfield on the Sunday, obviously we have our phones off. As you should do.
Your phone off now?
And my phone was off. And just before we went on air, I turned it on, and we were just about to go on air, literally 1 minute before we went on air. And I turned the phone on and phoned my wife, and my sister-in-law answered, and she said, "You've had the baby." So, of course, 30 seconds later, I'm on air, so I had to put the phone down. And then Richard Keys heard the conversation. So Richard Keys says to me live on air, well, says to the world, "Congratulations, John, he's had his seventh child, Alexander." So, of course, a lot of people then felt that, you know, I shouldn't have been there, I should have been at the birth. And had I known the baby was going to be born, I would have. Obviously, that's why we're having it induced. But of course, a lot of people, you know, gave me a little bit of stick about that. But that's life. All
right, let's talk about you as a child. What kind of kid were you? I mean, I'm thinking cheeky.
Naughty.
The first.
Well, listen, I grew up in Jamaica, and in let's say the 70s.
Okay.
I was born in 63, but between 63 and 70, not really growing up, are you? So in the 70s, I grew up in Jamaica. I've got 2 elder sisters. My father was a colonel in the Jamaican army, so I grew up on an army base in Jamaica. I spent all my life there till I came to England. Quite naughty, as all boys are. And my father was a real disciplinarian. He's a real man's man in terms
military man.
Yeah, and in terms of boys shouldn't hit girls and that kind of thing. And of course, you have brothers?
I don't have brothers.
Okay, well, you would have been fighting with them had you had them. So I fought with my sisters, and although they were older than me and bigger than me, I was the one getting in trouble because boys shouldn't hit girls type of thing. But sport played a big part in the family's life. My dad played football for Jamaica. He played cricket for Trinidad because he's from Trinidad. My sister swam for Jamaica, played squash for Jamaica. My other sister played tennis for Jamaica. So growing up, sport played a big part in our lives. So when I went to England at 14 in 1976, as much as I'd never seen snow before and it was really cold, I remember it very clearly, January the 26th, 1976, probably one of the coldest winters. As we're coming into Heathrow, in fact, what was up to 3 years ago Chelsea's training ground, it wasn't then, but it was just a big open field of kids playing football, and I saw kids my age with proper kit, with a proper referee, and I thought, I'm home, you know, because I always grew up playing football in Jamaica, much more football than cricket, but I just, you know, when I saw that kid had football boots and proper kits and referees and linesmen, you know, I was just really looking forward to it.
Let's talk about how you were discovered. And this is going to be the only football question I'm going to ask you. Now, you said it was fate. Why was that?
Well, everything in life is fate. But I mean, in my particular case back then in 1980, as was the norm back then for any player of my age who happened to have made it as a footballer, would have had to have a certain element of luck, fate, whatever you want to call it, play a part in that process, because I was just playing in a park with a local side, a non-league team, but not a non-league team like you see them in the FA Cup now. We didn't have a stadium and there were 10 people watching. One of them happened to be a taxi driver so I found out later, who knew a scout from Watford. And he asked the scout to come and have a look at me. And the scout came, had a look at me, and I must have had a good game. One of 20 people. But, you know, that taxi driver may have just have driven past. The scout could have come and I may have had a bad game, and he says, you're no good. So, the rest is history. Watford then obviously offered me a contract. But I felt there were so many of my, teammates at that time, young boys like me who I felt were as good as me, even better than me, who weren't given an opportunity. Nowadays, they get kids in academies from their 12 and 13, so no one slips through the net. Whereas back in the early 80s, late 70s, you had so many good players who weren't spotted, and I was just fortunate to be one of them who was.
But you didn't have an easy time playing, though. You had lots of things to contend with, one of which is racism.
Well, I had a lot of racism to contend with, but it was an easy time playing for me because I love football and I would never let racism affect me. I don't know whether it's because I was brought up in Jamaica, and of course the way your family bring you up is so important, because, you know, I mean, when I played in the 80s, bananas were coming on the field and lots of racist chanting and monkey chants, and it never affected me like water off a duck's back, because that's the way I dealt with it. You know, and I would never let them win by even showing a reaction. And it's not even a question of me having to fight that by I'm not going to show them either that it's getting to me. It really didn't get to me. And that's who I was. Now, I always use Ian Wright as an example. Now, Ian Wright would go in there and fight them, and he'd throw things at them, and that's what he has to do. So there's no right or wrong way of dealing with racism, because when people say to me about talking to Emile Heskey a few years ago about how to deal with the racism, I said, you have to do what's right for yourself in your own character. And for you to perform, for you to get out of bed, if you need to do what Ian Wright does, that's what you do. So what was right for me and the way I dealt with it was complete and utter, you know, it really was water off a duck's back to me.
All right. Up next on Stadium Unplugged.
And there's only going to be one winner, obviously, with two people from Newcastle.